Good evening, welcome to Football Geeks. Tonight we welcome the guy who was our debut guest on the podcast. Then he chatted about his previous book, Dutch Masters, which covered the story of the successful Ajax side of the early 70s. His new tome, Jogo Bonito, also explores the finer nuances of the beautiful game. An authoritative and finely detailed exploration of the Brazil World Cup winning side of 1970, also taking in the successes and failures that preceded the Mexico 1970 tournament. Welcome, Gary Thacker. Good evening, Gaz. How are you, mate?
Thanks, Bill. Great to be back on board with you at the Football Geeks. To talk about my new book. So, yeah, always good fun, mate, to have a chat about football with you, mates.
Brilliant. It's always a milestone when you get to the end of writing a book, I guess, isn't it? Because it's something to be proud of, and all you want to do is talk about it. Then I would imagine.
Indeed, yeah. Well, this is my 8th one, and my last book. So I'm sort of retired now, so that's me hanging up my pen, but hanging up my laptop, I suppose, would be more appropriate. But yeah, it's a feeling of sort of a sort of relief, but also a little bit sort of, what do I do now? But the wife's finding me plenty of jobs to do, so that's there's no chance of boredom setting in.
Do you find yourself when you're halfway through a book, you get another idea that zaps into your head, and you think, I can't wait to finish this one because I want to move on to that one?
Absolutely right, Mike. And I tend to, not now, but in the past, I've tended to speak to the publishers about the next one while I'm halfway through the one that I'm working on there, just to get the approval so I can start solidifying thoughts. Because you get to this stage where, you sort of line in bed and you think, oh, that's a good idea. You want to write it down, but you can on the phone. You just press record on your phone so you don't forget, because otherwise you've got no chance, especially when you get to my age.
So the expectation is that we can meet again in like a year's time and talk about the 9th one. Let's hope. But let's talk about.
Not, Mark. No, officially retired now, Phil. So that's it, mate. That's my last one. No, I've got the Spanish tax system doesn't allow me to do that sort of thing. So once I'm retired on pensioner now.
Oh, okay, mate. Well, I'm sure you'll enjoy it. But in the meantime, we'll talk about this fantastic book. I've read it page to page. It's fantastic. But in the previous books, you've shown us that you're a bit of a football purist, and Jogo Bonito continues in that vein, charting the progress of arguably the greatest side to grace a football pitch, and that was, of course, Mario Zagallo's Brazil of 1970. So tell us a little bit about the book. What can the reader expect from it, mate?
Well, with a book like when you're writing about a historical tournament or a team's development, it's always difficult to where do you start. But with this one, it wasn't too bad because you could start at the first World Cup, which is what I did, and work the way through and how Brazilian football developed from there. And obviously, you go through the American that's in 1950, which we'll talk about later. There's Brazil's successes, 58, 62, the failure of 66, and why it's not only the obvious description about Pele getting kicked out. There's far more to it than that. And then the success of 70, and then how it fell apart again afterwards. So yeah, I sort of took it from 1930, started the World Cup, all the way through the key points till you get to where the Brazilian football starts falling apart. And I got to the stage where I was going through it. Each of the sort of sections, I've used a song title for, which is weird. I didn't realize at first that it was doing it, and it worked quite well at the end. So at the end, it was it's my part, and I'll cry if I want to. So yeah, it's basically a potted history of Brazilian World Cup football with the highlights of the things we just discussed.
Yeah, so, I love the song titles, and that final one couldn't be more apt, could it? Really?
It fits so nicely.
Yeah. But Brazil are the only nation to feature in every World Cup competition, and they've always brought like a kind of pedigree and expectation with them, haven't they? But in the inaugural tournaments of the 30s, they weren't really amongst the favourites. They weren't even the strongest team on their continent, were they?
Not even close. Now the real potential teams, that's Uruguay and Argentina, were the key teams, and Brazil was just a developing team. And the first World Cup, they played a couple of games, and they won one and lost one, and were out. 4 years later, they go to Italy, and it's just a straight knockout competition. They play one game. Get across the Atlantic this is 1934, across the Atlantic in just days by boat. Play one game, lost to Spain 3-1, and so they're out. They're going to go back. See you, lads. Catch you next time. So 38 did a little bit better. They lost to Italy in the semi-finals. They went on to win the tournament, beating Hungary in the final. So their pedigree was sort of developing, shall we say, towards the end of the 1938 World Cup. But obviously the Second World War kicked in then, and away you go. And Brazilian football was sort of became quite, South American football became sort of isolated because of obviously the European conflict. And Brazil actually, when FIFA wanted to start the World Cup up again in 1950, we wanted to do it in 1949 actually originally, but in 1950 Brazil was the outstanding candidate because obviously all the European countries were sort of on their knees because of the war and the after effects of that, and they got granted the World Cup. And it was a big thing for Brazil. They were becoming a sort of industrialized nation, a developed nation. They wanted to prove themselves on the world stage by hosting the World Cup. It was a great chance for Brazil to sort of strut their stuff, shall we say, as a first-rate country. And they decided to build the Maracanã, which literally the paint was still wet when the first game was played there. But anyway, they built it, and obviously they went quite a long way into it. It's the only World Cup tournament where there wasn't a final.
Yeah.
Because they had two sets of groups, and the top teams from each group going to the second group to play for the tournament, and they won all three of the group. They won two of the group games, lost drew against Switzerland, but beat Mexico and Yugoslavia. In the second group, they really found their stride and beat Sweden 7-1, Spain 6-1, and they only needed a draw against Uruguay to win the trophy. And it was almost like an accepted belief that this was going to happen. It was done. This fight's going to happen. And especially when they took lead, Thacker scored to give them the lead. And that was all set then. I mean, the newspapers ahead of the game had produced banner headlines saying Brazil world champions. And, it's sort of like, there's lots of a slip between cup and lip, as they say, and this is what happened. And Ciafano, who later became the world's most expensive footballer when he moved to Italy, equalised, and then Giggia scored the winning goal. And his wonderful quote he gave in an interview with the BBC many years afterwards, he said, "There's only three people ever quietened the Maracanã. That's the Pope, Frank Sinatra, and me." And there's a museum quite near the Maracanã Football Museum, and they've got this in this darkened room, a television set, and a voiceover, and it's of the game. And when Giggia scores, the commentary says, just all the way through, it does this like heartbeat, bump, 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 and when Giggia scores, it stops, and it's said the commentary is something like, "And the heart of Brazil is broken."
Yeah.
It's interesting that there's a couple of things worth mentioning about that game. Firstly, Pelé said later it was the only time he ever saw his father cry.
Yeah.
And there was I think he was 17, or he might be 18, a young soldier on duty at the Maracanã and the World Cup final, who actually restored Brazil's pride after. His name was Mario Zagallo.
Oh,
so that's a sort of interesting thing I found out afterwards. That's a nice little round out. But so the dream was sort of shattered. And of course, there's lots of blame going around there. And in those days, Brazil wore, they didn't have a Canaria shirt. They wore all white. And they vowed after that game never to wear all white again.
yeah.
Which is an interesting thing will come up when we get a bit to later tournaments. So they had a competition, a newspaper competition to design the kit. And I can't remember the guy's name, to be honest with you now, but it was a fairly young lad who came up with the kit that we wear now. He basically took the colours of the Brazilian flag, yellow, blue and green, and created the famous Brazil kit afterwards. And 54, they came afterwards. They did quite well in 54 and got through until they played Hungary, who were, probably the best team in the world at the time. But I'm sure it was a great football occasion, but it turned into a bloodbath of the football, and the Brazil got beaten and they were fighting and sending off, and it's a terrible thing. And it's like all the anger and frustration from 50 sort of spilled out again.
Yeah.
They were sort of progressing along, but there was still that sort of final hurdle they couldn't get over. It was like this sort of great fear almost of the success.
Yeah, it's. I mean that 1954 Battle of Bern. I was reading up on it, and like the Hungarian secret police was stationed outside the ground, and had to with batons wielded and guns in hand. They had to shepherd the Hungarian kind of players out of the stadium. So it got pretty tasty at the tail end, and one can only think that there must have been some politics involved, because we'll go into this later. I mean. Brazil kind of entered into a kind of nationalistic kind of fervor, didn't it? And that was opposed to the communism of Hungary, and maybe that had something to do with it. But we'll touch on politics as we approach 1970 a bit more, because aside from the great football, there was a little bit of a kind of a political, a vast political undertone, wasn't there? But let's move on to 1958. I mean, Brazil eventually get it right, don't they? In the World Cup of '58, and just talk us through that. I'll let you do the talking, mate.
Okay. Well, they arrived in Sweden with a fairly untried team, and Pele was just a kid. Garrincha the same. They had established players like Zagallo, Vava was there, but they didn't. Pele didn't play. Garrincha didn't play in the first couple of games. Although they beat Austria 3-0 in the first game, and they had players like Altafini, who was playing, at Juve at the time, and so he went to Juve afterwards. And then they drew with England 0-0 in the only game they didn't score. And then they played the Soviet Union, and the winners were going to go through, and they won 2-0. Vava scored both the goals, and they got through to the quarterfinals then. And the players at that stage they hadn't sort of dominated the tournament at that point, and the players had sort of got to the coach and said, "Look, we need Pele. Pele's got to play." And he basically anyway put him in, and they played the quarterfinal. They played Wales. It was probably the toughest game they had. It's Pele who got the winner, and they got into the semi-final where they played France, and that was a fascinating game. France were a really good team at the time, and obviously they had the guy who scored all the goals in the tournament, the top scorer,
Just Fontaine,
just Fontaine, and they had also a player at this centre back, the captain, named called Jean Kay, who played for Stade de Reims, who were sort of the sort of rivals of Real Madrid, the sort of European Cup situation. And I think it was a very close game, but he broke his leg. And after that, Brazil sort of took dominate. Pele got a hat trick. Vava scored again. Didi, will come on to afterwards, an interesting character. And they got to the final. And it's interesting now, but I mentioned about the kits. Now, when obviously Sweden played in the final, as the home team, they had their yellow and blue. Well, Brazil couldn't play in yellow and blue, obviously, because of that. And they were originally the plan to play in all white. The players refused because of the Maracanã, the disaster against Uruguay. So on the day before the game, one of the trainers, the physio, had to go into the Stockholm and buy shirts. They bought some blue T-shirts with collars on, and the badges were hand sewn, and the numbers were hand sewn on afterwards. And that's what they played in all blue, in the blue top, because of they wouldn't wear the all white. And of course, the famous game where Pele sort of announced himself onto the world stage as this incredible talent. It's interesting, the game. Sweden scored first. Lindholm scored for Sweden, and he became the oldest player ever scored a World Cup final, and still keeps that to this day. And not long after, Pele scored and became the youngest player ever in a World Cup final, and still is to this day. So it's a fascinating sort of thing there. But they swept through to win 5-2 in the end. So yeah, that was the sort of real launch pad for not only for Brazil, but also, of course, for Pele.
Yeah. In another tweet, I was speaking to Alex Ireland, who's up on football kits, and like the Pele kit was amongst one of the most expensive in the world, but also Diego Maradona's at 1986. That was one of the most expensive, and both of them were kits that weren't in circulation. They were manufactured. Because Argentina's kit was too kind of it made the players sweat too much. That to go to a shop in downtown Mexico City and buy some T-shirts, and that 7 million shirt as Pele's was in 1958, was just a shirt that they bought in a shop downtown.
I didn't know that. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah. Alex is a fascinating guy. He knows his stuff about kids. That's for sure.
Oh, he's the oracle when it comes to kits. I would say. So anyway, mate. Moving on to 1962, they got the job done. I would say they weren't as good as 58, were they? Or would you contest that?
They had probably had a better balanced team, but they didn't perform as well. They had the big Mexico the first game, 2-0, and then as in the previous tournament, they drew the second game. This was against Czechoslovakia, and in this game, Pele had a shot quite midway through the first half from distance, and basically spragged a muscle. And he played out on the right wing. This is before subs were obviously about.
Yeah.
Playing out the right wing as a passenger. And then he was out of the tournament from there. And he was going to step up to the plate. Well, there's two players basically did. Amarildo was a reserve player. I think he played one game and hadn't scored. I think he came on as a sub in a tour of Chile, if memory serves me right. But he hadn't scored. And Garincha was the other guy who sort of stepped into the plate. And in the next game, they played Spain. And jumping into Pele's boots, I mean, there's a big boost to fill. Amarildo scored both the goals, against Spain, which took them through to the knockouts, where they played England. And this was Garincha's sort of time now. Garincha scored twice against England, but I think Jimmy Greaves scored the goal for England, which took him to play Chile, who were the host, in the semi-final. And it's a fascinating game. Garincha scored a couple of goals, and Vava scored. It was quite a heated game, and I can't remember the name of the Chilean guy who was marking Garincha, but he kicked him all through the game. And eventually, Garincha lost his temper towards the end of the game and lashed out back at him. And the guy was a Peruvian referee who later became a Mexican citizen and lined in the Mexico World Cup final. Yeah, he's strange enough. His name Fukuyama. He's got a Japanese name, but he's Peruvian. And he basically got sent off. And as he was walking off, he got hit on the head by a stone by one of the Chilean supporters. And now this is the World Cup final, semi-final, and the final's coming up. This guy's been sent off. But at this time, they didn't have automatic bans. Disciplinary committees sat before the next game, decided what the punishment would be. Now, Czechoslovakia had qualified for the final. And this is the time where the Cold War was sort of hotting up. And there's a big thing where the Americans and the Western world didn't want a communist country to win the World Cup. So there was a lot of pressure on this committee to sort of be lenient with Garincha. And eventually they were. They let him play. And, the final was a strange one as well, because there's a guy called Maspuset who scored for Czechoslovakia and put them ahead. Now, this is a team that are 0-0 draw with Brazil earlier. So Brazil hadn't scored against them in the entire game. If they could hold out, they could win the World Cup. But they held out for precisely 100 seconds before Amarildo scored again. And then Zito scored, and Vava finished it off. And they become the team to retain the World Cup, as Italy had done in the 30s. So that was established then, 58, 62. It was established that Brazil were the best team in the world.
Yeah.
Until 1966 came along.
That's right. When the veil of dominance began to slip a little, didn't it? So what happened to Brazil in the lead up and during the 1966 FA Cup finals game?
Well, before that, after 62, because they were that sort of famous, that celebrated, the Brazilian FA, as they still do to this day, decide to send them on a tour of Europe. Now, ostensibly, this was what we're going to do, guys, is give you some games against European competition so you get used to playing in Europe for the World Cup in 1966. That was the official story. The real story was it was all about raising brass. And it was a pretty disastrous tour. They won some games, they lost some games, didn't play particularly well. But what it did do, it gave European teams a way, an understanding how to beat Brazil. So it was a sort of real sort of throwback to the sort of mistakes people make when you're making, you say you're going to do this for one reason, you do it for something else. They really paid a price for that. I say they didn't play particularly well, got beat a few times. And so the 1966 World Cup came around, and this is where the story starts going AWOL now. Instead of having a concentrated squad, they picked at various stages. I was talking to a couple of guys who were kind of to be interviewed. Andrew Downey was one who wrote the wonderful book about Brazil. And he told me that they had at one stage 46 players in the squad. And they basically, instead of having a concentrated training camp, they took the team around there. And Brazil's a massive country.
Yeah.
The north of Brazil is nearer to Canada than it is to the south of Brazil. That's how big Brazil is. A massive country, and obviously the Amazon as well. And they took it around 7, 8, 9 different areas where the local politicians would pay the Brazilian FA to bring them so they could become popular and all this sort of thing. So they're touted around again. And even when they flew to I think they went to Scotland, they had 3 players too many that they had to send back. So this was really badly organised. And they also I missed one thing out. Garrincha was known for being a little bit lax with things, shall we say. And a lot of the players owed taxes, and some players paid it. Zagallo was particularly one who paid his tax bill, but Garrincha hadn't got the money. And at this time, because Brazil had won in '58 and '62, the Avalanche, who was head of the Brazilian FA, wanted to become the head of FIFA, and he was thinking, well, if we win again in '66, it's a great thing to get me to be the new head of FIFA.
Yeah.
So he paid off Garrincha's taxes to allow the Garrincha to go, which was quite a lot of brass apparently. And but unfortunately, Garrincha wasn't the player he used to be when he got to England. And but also because the FA had also decided not to just trust the coach, and they sent a technical commission comprising of 3 of their officials to oversee, to assist the coach, which becomes nonsensical. So he had this sort of conflict all the time. So there's a lot of things going on within the squad, as it were, and the party. And obviously Brazil started against Bulgaria, and this is when the sort of widely accepted situation kicks in. Literally, Brazil Pele and Garrincha score, and Pele gets kicked from pillar to post. And it's the last time Pele and Garrincha started a game for Brazil. And in the other games they'd played, I can't remember, it was a lot, they hadn't lost a game. So anyway, so they played the next game. Pele's injured. They played Hungary, and Hungary won comfortably 3-1. So it's in a situation. The last game they've got to. I think they need to draw to qualify. They might need to win to qualify, but they got beat. Portugal adopted a similar tone to what Bulgaria had, and they kicked them players up in the air. Pele came back. They made ahead of that game. They made 9 changes to the team. 9 changes.
Yeah.
I think one was positional, but the entire defence was taken out, replaced. This is how chaotic the situation was with the coach and his technical commission. And they got beaten, they got knocked out. And obviously that was then Pele decided, I've had enough of this. And he retired from international football. And all of a sudden, from being double world champions, Brazil in chaos. And nobody knows, 4 years later, that they have the greatest World Cup team probably anybody's ever seen.
Yeah, it's funny you say, because 1970, which obviously forms the crux of your book, it's a hell of a story, but things didn't look auspicious in the lead up to the tournament for Brazil, either from a sporting or a political perspective, did they, mate? There's some pretty ugly stuff going on behind the scene.
Yeah, well, they brought back Moreira as coach, and it wasn't going well towards the sort of qualifying tournament for the World Cup. And press was on the back of Avalanche, and of course, whenever the sort of like a chairman of a club or a board director under pressure, what do? They sack the manager, blame him, not me, blame him, not me, governor. So anyway, basically, he got sacked, and it was a real left field decision to bring in a guy called João Saldana, who was actually a newspaper reporter, who was a journalist. at the time. He'd actually he had coached Botafogo to a championship. He'd given the job when he used to play, and then he sort of walked away. Very controversial figure, very sort of combustible. Anyway, so he got the job, which Avalanche sort of thought, well, to one stage, yeah, he might be the guy for the job, but also if he's I've got a press guy managing the club, managing the team, the other press guy is going to be less likely to throw bricks at him.
Yeah.
So that was the sort of approach he took. And so basically, Saldana took over, and immediately the players sort of looked at it as a bit of a fresh air thing, and he did quite well, but he did very well, in fact. Got through the qualifying tournaments with a 100% record. He had this, his way of playing was 4-2-4, so he had two wide players playing. And the players who were most on the occasion were a guy called Paulo Cesar and Edu. After the qualification, in his typical way, he started sort of falling out with people. And there's a story that this is post the military coup in Brazil. The military in charge there. And this time's a guy called Medici. He was a very not a very nice guy, very sort of hard line. And there's a player called Dario who looked to be on the verge of getting the team. And rumor had it that Medici wanted Dario in the team because he was his favourite player. Now, whether that's true or not is difficult to say because there's nothing ever written about it. It's just sort of what's sort of come through in rumours. But the press picked up on this, and at a press conference, they asked Saldana, well, Dario is obviously the president's favourite player. Are you going to pick him? And Saldana, I mean, Benitez said, yeah, of course I'm going to put him in the squad, but he didn't. Because he's quite abrasive, and he said, I don't tell Medici, I didn't tell the president who to put in his cabinet, and he doesn't tell me who to put in my team. Which is a bit brave because this guy was proper hardline, and he said he came from right at the south of the country, Saldana, in Rio Grande do Sul, which is the same place the president came from as well. And they're called gauchos. That's what they're called in that area. And he said, I get on very well with the president because we're both gauchos and we understand each other and all that sort of thing. Now, whether that contributed to his dismissal or not, because the results started to plateau and people were getting concerned. So Avalanche said, I'm going to reorganise the coaching system. And when the new coaching system was publicised, there was no Saldana. Instead, he'd given the job to Mario Zagallo. Saldana, as I say, was not the sort of guy to take it on the chin, and he started saying things about the players. Pele's got bad eyesight, Gerson's got mental issues, and I came to quite a lot of sort of picking at the players. Anyway, Zagallo took over. This is literally 2 months before the World Cup started. 2 months, and Zagallo didn't play the 4-2-4 system that Saldana at his club, and even when he was playing for Brazil, he played like a modified 4-3-3. So basically, whether Brazil had the ball, he was playing with 4 forwards, 2 wide players, Pele and a striker. Tostão would be the guy in the end. But he wanted a player who, when they lost the ball, could drop back into midfield to make it a 4-3-3 to give it a solidity to the midfield. And he tried Edu, and he couldn't really do it. He tried Paulo Cesar because they were both basically wingers. That's sort of their job, and when playing back. And not long before the tournament, he decided to give a chance to Rivellino. Now, Rivellino was actually number 10, played for his club. I think it's Corinthians he played for. He was number 10. So he played him out on the wing, and then to drop back in the field, and it worked. And so basically, he got his team sort of settled. And the only other thing he had to change was there's a guy called Marco Antonio who was playing left back, and he wasn't sure about him. And he gave the last game before I think they played Austria in a friendly before they flew out to Mexico. And he gave Everaldo a chance left back, and he had the thing all the way through. And in the tournament of his first choice 11, Everaldo was the only player that wasn't wearing a 1 to number 11 shirt. Because he was also his addition to it. So yeah, then the key thing was before Saldana was sacked, there was a guy called Da Costa who was a naval lieutenant, and he was an analyst, shall we say, and he did a lot of work around altitude in the Mexico Olympics, which happened a couple of years before, and how altitude affected players. He developed this plan to get players, which was actually taken for sort of granted. Now players got to altitude training. Well, there were 3 different camps he had building up the altitude each time for players to get acclimatized to playing in Mexico, and it worked really well. Although there was a sort of after effect for it afterwards, which was sort of more of a disadvantage than advantage. There was a major issue with Tostao as well. The year before, excuse me, he's playing a club game, and he had a ball hit him in the eye, and it had a detached retina. And he thought this is, not only going to miss the World Cup, it could finish his career, could blind. And he had to flew to Colorado for an operation, which was carried out by this doctor. And he came back and had to be careful all the way through. But it was only weeks before the tournament he came back. And he came back, he's played a couple of games, and it seemed to be okay. Then he had this eye trouble develop again at one of the training camps, and flew the doctor from Colorado up to Mexico to check him over, but it was just conjunctivitis. He was just diagnosed as, and he was okay to carry on. So things got sort of settled, and there was a crisis again before the tournament started when one of the players, Rogerio, who was a wide player, right winger, had an injury in a friendly game, and so Zagallo was going to replace him, but instead of picking another right winger, he selected a goalkeeper, an extra goalkeeper, and he went to Jairzinho, who was a fairly young player at the time, and said, I've picked this goalkeeper rather than away because I've got my full faith in you. You are the best player in this position. You're going. And Jairzinho afterwards, it was an inspirational talk that Zagallo, and he performed afterwards. Obviously, was so well, scoring every game. So there was a sort of fairly chaotic build-up to the tournament. And Rivellino said that when they flew out to Mexico, a lot of the expectation was they might not even get out of the group. But obviously, as things happened, they did a lot better than that.
They did. I mean, they turned. I mean, it was obviously a triumph by Zagallo of man management and kind of preparation, really, because they arrived at that tournament fitter, stronger, and a happier Brazil, didn't they? And boy, it showed on the pitch, didn't it?
Yeah. Well, because they were South American. Once Mexico got knocked out, which I think was in the quarterfinals, lost to Italy, there were a lot of support and a swing behind Brazil. And it's interesting that when the draw was made, it wasn't seeded in as much as they were seeded geographically rather than by strength of team. So Brazil were put in the same group as England. So the 2 teams that won the World Cup the last 3 times were put in the same group. And that there again further helped Brazil in as much as because Alf Ramsey was quite the Englishman abroad, shall we say. They brought their own food over, their own water, they even brought their own coach over. Didn't integrate with the Mexicans, and Brazil had open training sessions where they let the Mexican fans watch. England quite the opposite. Their hotel was like a fortress. So there again, that helped to give Brazil a lot of favour as well. And Pelé famously donated a pair of his old boots to a Mexican football museum. So there was good PR going on. Yeah. Mexico adopted Brazil. And in the first game, they played Czechoslovakia and conceded the first goal. They were losing 1-0. Petraš scored the goal, the Czech forward. But after that, Brazil came to do Rivellino equalised with a ferocious free kick, as typical he's made his name for. Pelé scored, and then Jairzinho scored his first couple of goals. And then came a key game against England. Now, this is the only game, 12 months before, when England had played a tour in South America, they played Brazil. This was Saldano's Brazil. And England were leading 1-0 for quite a long time. Brazil even missed a penalty, Banks saved a penalty, and it was only the last 10 minutes that Brazil scored when England tired. And both sorts of teams took lessons from that. Ramsey was convinced that it was only fatigue that cost his players the match.
Yeah.
Brazilian players knew that they were convinced that they would wear teams down. And eventually, in the tournament in 70, most of Brazil's goals were scored in the second period after half time because they were far stronger. They were fitter and the altitude training. And it was in the second half when Jairzinho got the goal against England, and basically Brazil were on the way through to the next round then, and England was going to struggle. Yeah. Then they played Romania in the last game, and it was a game that Pelé criticised their performance on, where they said they were almost overconfident, and it was almost like a lesson to bring them back into concentration, guys. This ain't all over. Because they only beat Romania 3-2, and but they were through to the quarterfinals and the knockout stage, and it was important for Brazil to win that group because whoever won the group would play the runners-up in the group in Lyon, and the runners-up would play the winners in Lyon. England ended up playing West Germany, and Brazil played Peru. This is what I mentioned about Didi earlier. Now, Didi was a very famous Brazilian player. He was the player of the tournament in 1958. Even though Pelé was a star, it was Didi who was awarded the player of the tournament. And he'd now taken over the Peruvian team. So they were playing against a Brazilian coach who a lot of the players knew Zagallo knew very well. Pelé had played with him, Zagallo had played with him. So there was that sort of thing. And Peru, this was the Peru with the famous white shirt with the red band. They were a brilliant game there. Both teams wanted to attack, and Brazil were a bit more organised, a bit more worldly wise, and they eventually got through against Peru, although it was a close game. Peru had a couple of chances to get back into it when they were behind. Eventually, Brazil won 4-2. It's interesting, a couple of goals there in the game. Felix, the Brazilian goalkeeper, when the game against Romania, Zagallo criticised him for conceding one of the first goal Romania scored because he was beaten by a bobbling shot.
Yeah.
And Zagallo says, whatever you do, you can't leave your post, you've got to stay on your post and all this sort of thing. And in this game, it's exactly the reverse happened because he didn't come off his post. He conceded the goal, and then the second half, Rivellino's goal was almost exactly the same against Rubinho, who was the goalkeeper for Chile, when he beat him on the near post. It was really two strange goals in that game. But it was the one game where Everaldo didn't play because he'd been injured the previous game, and Marco Antonio came back in, but only briefly. And Brazil actually got through in the end 4-2, but it was a classic game, and it took him into what became a political game. With regard to the way they played Uruguay in the semi-final, and it was bringing them back to the situation where 1950, the ghosts of 1950 were there again, and the press kept reminding them about what happened. Can you get revenge and all this sort of thing? And Uruguay were coached by an Argentinian guy, Hoiberg, his name was Hoiberg, and he decided he's going to man-mark Gerson, because Gerson was really, the puppet master of the team.
Yeah.
Pelé was the star, but Gerson was the puppet master. And he put a guy on Gerson. He really choked the team off a bit. Cabilla put Uruguay ahead, and all of a sudden things were looking really dicey. The ghosts of the 1950s were coming out. It's going to happen again. We're going to get beat again by Uruguay. They're going to do it to us again. Uruguay were a really strong physical team. And what Zagallo decided to do, because Gerson was being marked out of the game, Clodoaldo, who played in midfield alongside him, was more the sort of safety guy. So and they said, well, rumour has it was Gerson's idea, said to Clodoaldo, I'll drop back, you go forward. I'll drag the marker out of position because there's great space for you. Which in fact what happened, and just before half-time, Clodoaldo equalised. It was his only goal for Brazil in his career. But he turned the tide, and then Jairzinho scored, and Rivellino scored the third. But the best part of that game was in the last minute. The game was always over, but I think it was Rivellino played a through ball towards Pelé, and he ran through, and the goalkeeper, Zerkovic, trying to cut the angle down, and instead of trying to clip it over the goalkeeper came out. Pelé stepped over the ball, and the ball went one way, Pelé went the other way around the goalkeeper, and came back to try and put it in the net afterwards. But the angle was so tight, the recovering defender just clipped his heel and missed. It could have been a brilliant goal, but it's one of those moments where it almost didn't matter that it went in the net or not. The magic was enough.
It was an outrageous moment, wasn't it? It was an outrageous piece of skill. But I was talking to somebody a couple of weeks ago about the four iconic moments, one of Pelé's career, the ones that you remember the most, didn't result in Pelé scoring. And the one was the halfway line shot against Czechoslovakia in the first game.
Yeah.
And then there was the Banks save in the second game.
Yeah.
Because, then that game where you say Mazurkovic, he completely flummoxed him and then put it wide. And the fourth one was in a final. But you know the pass to Carlos Alberto.
Oh yes, yes.
But we'll talk about that in a bit. And they're the four Pele moments that everyone remembers the most.
Yeah, on that one, mate. Banks, the Banks slave. It's interesting. When he went into Mexico, he played a couple of games. They played some friendly games, obviously, before the tournament started. And he noticed that Mexican goalkeepers have got large gloves with like a strip of rubber padding. It was like a table tennis bat.
Yeah.
On the front, to supposedly help grip the ball. And when the header from Pele, so it was arrowing towards goal, Banks says he bought a pair of the gloves. He was wearing them in that game, and he says it was the sponginess of that table tennis like that created the lift to get it over the bar. A few years ago, I was doing a radio on talk radio, and Alan Mullen was on, and he was saying that he was mocking Pele. And when Pele's header, he sort of down and Banks got up and he said, said to Banks, he said, "Go on, you could have caught that." And he said, "I can't really see what Banks." He said back to me.
I bet it weren't sorry, mate. Yeah. So moving on to the final, which was it holds a place in the pantheon of great, not just great World Cup games, but great games ever, doesn't it? So do you want to talk us through the prelude to that game and then the game itself, because it was a cracker, wasn't it?
It was brilliant. I mean, they played Italy in the final. Italy had played a titanic game against West Germany in the semi-final, which ended up 4-3. They played extra time, and it was absolutely brutal. In the end, the players were sort of lying flat out on the pitch like, soldiers after a battle. So that did take a lot of the strength away from Italy. They were only playing 4 or 5 days afterwards for the final. There's interesting about the guy who scored the goal for Italy in the game, Bonito. He wasn't in the squad originally. He was fishing on a lake on holiday with his family when a call came that to go fly to Mexico. I can't remember, was it someone was injured and he's going to need a replacement. And rumor had it, he just put some fish he caught in the net in his picnic, and. So when he got to the airport to fly to Mexico, there was another guy there. I can't remember the guy's name. He was another forward. And they realised basically that Valcareggi, who was the Italian manager, hadn't really decided he could fly them both out. And actually, one of them, he thought, well, one of us ain't going to make it. We're going to get kicked out. But when he got to Mexico, he kept them both and sent somebody else home. That's really strange. So Bonito was a late addition to the team. But performed really well in the tournament. And Valcareggi they took Italy on tour there the previous summer, and he decided he got two standing midfield players. Mazzola played for Inter, and Gianni Rivera, who played for AC Milan, who'd won the Ballon d'Or previous season. And there was always debate which player should. It's a bit like the Gerard Lampard, never solved. But basically, Valcareggi decided he'd play Mazzola in the first half of games, take him off at half time, and put Rivera on because he was more of a sort of attacking-minded flair player. It worked quite well through the tournament, and he called it the staffetta. It's like the baton in a relay race. Yeah. So that's what they were doing throughout the tournament, and so he came to the final, and the differences there is so marked in the report of the event. So Brazil travelled to the stadium. Playing Samba music with playing guitars and singing and tapping, and they've been cheered by the fans on the way there. The Italians, quite the reverse. They were really nervous, and the fans were sort of booing them and all this sort of thing on the way there. And the Italian FA were that sort of unconvinced of the situation they're going to win. They hadn't. They left the hotel and had to pack up because they were going to fly back after the game. No, go back to sleep after the game. No, then the following day and all this sort of thing. They were flying back after the game. Anyway, Brazil and Italy were in the final, and it was strange enough. It was quite an overcast day originally. The sun came out afterward, but it was quite an overcast day. And Pele scored the opening goal with that sort of header against Jose. And then they were sort of getting quite cocky and passing the ball around a bit, and there was a mistake. Bonito pounced and scored and equalised. And in fairness, after that, for the next sort of half an hour or so, the game was pretty even. Brazil had some chances. It was quite an open game. And then Gerson, who hadn't been man-marked, basically, Valcarregui hadn't learned the lesson that Uruguay had done, and hadn't man-marked Gerson. Gerson suddenly became more and more, as Italian legs tired, he came more and went to the game, and he scored 6 minutes. Then Jairzinho scored his goal to make him the only player to score every game of World Cup finals. And then came that moment you've just mentioned, buddy.
Yeah.
I mean, the finish is great, but he's got a whole build-up. I can't remember, but there's something like 17 Brazil players touch the ball. I mean, obviously some twice before he hit the goal. And there's a sequence with Everaldo that's got the ball in Brazilian half, and he jigs around 4 Italian players in the space of a telephone kiosk, and then just rolls it off. And it was that brilliant goal, as you say. And the ball came to Pele, and he had that sort of delay, and he knew it was Alberto. I mean, whether he called or not, but he never looked. Is he coming? He never looked. So whether it was something that practiced, I don't know, but he just laid it off and he crashed the ball.
Crashed in. The thing I love about that, when Pele receives the ball and plays that ball into that bit of opening space to his right hand side, there's no sign of Carlos Alberto.
Yeah, he wasn't in the picture.
He's still out of picture, and then he just in the final piece of the jigsaw is when you see him rattling down in and smashing that ball into the net. It is possibly the finest team goal of all time. It was magnificent. So they've won the Jules Rimet trophy again. They get to keep, but after that, you would have expected there to be an advancement in the Brazilian game, but it wasn't the way, was it? It left quite a different kind of legacy behind. Do you want to talk us through that legacy, Gav?
Sure. Just one little thing about the final as well, though. The Brazilian team, the doctor, I wish I could remember the doctor's name. I can't remember his name. Who operated on Tostão. The Brazilian team flew him down for the final, and he was in the dressing room afterwards. And Tostão apparently gave him his World Cup winners' medal, because I wouldn't have been here otherwise. So I mean, that's a nice little thing. I mean, I don't know, it's true, but a couple of reports suggest that's the case. Yeah, so because of the success of Da Costa's planning, the technocrats became quite powerful. Organisation was the key. Flair became less important. And 4 years later, when they turned up in West Germany to play to defend their World Cup, the team was so different. So there was only Jairzinho was playing, Rivellino was playing, Paulo Cesar was a reserve. He came a couple of times, but Pele wasn't there, Gerson wasn't there, Carlos Alberto wasn't there, Ronaldo wasn't there. So many of the star names were missing, and they instead of being true to the ethos of the team of 1970, they became like a street fighter team. And they qualified through to the it's not again, it wasn't knockout, it was second group stage, but eventually they were beaten by the Dutch, who sort of took over their crown as being the entertaining team of the world football, and Brazil sort of skulked away. And it's a terrible sort of after the Lord Mayor show sort of performance. After, it should have been 70 should have been the herald of a great era for Brazilian football, but it wasn't.
No. I mean, it's you talk about that Dutch side. It's a subject that you cover in your Beautiful Bridesmaids Dressed in Orange book, isn't it? That's another great one, great read for anyone who hasn't read it yet. But then we move on to 1978, and it was like a facsimile of 74, wasn't it? They came out, and it was a team that was based on solidity, not creativity, wasn't it? It was a very frustrating Brazil again.
Yeah, this is the Argentina World Cup, obviously, and the great rivalry between Brazil and Argentina at this stage. And obviously, Brazil were almost in the final of the game. the Argentinian World Cup organisers had set it up that Argentina always played last, so they knew what they had to do.
Yeah.
And when they played Peru in the semi-final, they had so in the last group part of the game, they needed to win by 4 goals, which is Peru were played really well in the tournament. And you think it's quite a battle. They won by 6 in the end. And there's all this talk about players being bribed and blackmailed. And there's the sort of Operation Condor between the number of South American countries who are under military dictatorships. And apparently afterwards, a big grain shipment was made and credit extended to Peru by Argentina. There's lots of stories, that come out of there. And, if you hear one story or 2 stories, you can dismiss them. When there's 756,000 stories, you've got to give it a credence.
Yeah.
I think there's lots of suggestions that the Peruvians didn't give it their all, shall we say?
Yeah.
But yeah, the team that played that tournament were very sort of pragmatic, not adventurous, and they got the situation where they tried to sort of mimic the Dutch team because that became the success story, the new way of playing, but they hadn't got the players to do that, and it was sort of a mishmash between 2 different styles, and eventually it was a sort of fell apart. If they'd have got to the final, I think the Dutch would have beat them anyway. But as it happens, they didn't, and it actually gave a little bit of breathing space then, because obviously in '82, Telly Santana again got the job as Brazil coach. Santana was famously called the last Brazilian romantic, because he believed in that ethos of 70. And he had the team of Socrates and Zico, Junior, Eder, Falcao, and a really great team. And they should have won the World Cup. And quite often, I was talking to I mentioned Andrew Downey, and he says that in Brazil, the '82 team is sort of given more respect, is better loved, shall I say, than the 70s, strangely enough. And I saw an interview with Paulo Cesar afterwards, and he said, players of 70 really were a little bit disappointed about that, because they'd been brilliant as '82, but had won.
Yeah.
They didn't even get the groups because they got knocked out by Italy.
Yeah.
So yes, that was '82 was a sort of like a last flaring. But what was happening then? Brazilian players obviously were going over to European clubs for the money, and they're becoming less, and the team was becoming less and less Brazilian. And there's very few home-based players who are playing in the tournament as things went on. And by the time you get to '94, for example, hardly any of the players were playing in Brazil. They were un-Brazilian. It was like a European team, because they were based in Europe.
Well, most of them were based in Italy as well, which is quite telling, because it was like as you say, they've been Europeanized, and the ones that weren't in Italy were in Spain, and Spain wasn't the La Liga that we know and love now. It was very much a lot of teams were geared towards the more kind of agrarian aspects of the game too. So, but
Brazil, it almost lost the magic. By this time we get '94, then afterwards when they win it again, they've won it 5 times and great. But you have to ask yourself the question: was 1970 Brazil the last true Brazilian, in inverted commas, team when Brazil won the World Cup? Because afterwards, the 2 victories afterwards were nothing like the Jogo Bonito.
No, I think if you're looking at the beautiful game, and you're looking at a team that of winners as well, I think you're probably right in saying that 1970 team it's the ultimate Jogo Bonito team, isn't it? They're amazing, mate. So, Gaz, thanks for talking to us tonight. So where's this fantastic new tome available, mate? Tell everyone where they can get their hands on a copy.
Well, it's available. It's not actually published until the 12th of February, but it's actually available for pre-order on Amazon, and you can order from most good bookshops, and probably a few crappy ones as well. But it came out of pre-order mid-December, 2 months ahead of date, and it was selling really well. Then it was in the sort of top 15, top 20 books in the World Cup section of Amazon. So that was quite gratifying. So yeah, it's if for anybody who likes beautiful football, it's just the beautiful team, the best team. I mean, I'm fortunate to have only written about things that I like. I script at my club, Dutch national team, which were brilliant, and the Ajax team, a favourite club team, other than Chelsea, and Brazil certainly to my mind. And I'm old enough to say to watched every World Cup that came across live. By far the best team to have won the World Cup, and it's something that no other team who've won the World Cup has really even come close to emulating. Yeah, teams have won it, and they've won it. Some have won it well. Some have had decent players, but nothing like that. Nothing like that, mate.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful, magical story.
Yeah, well, I have had the privilege of reading it, mate. What I would say to anyone who wants it, it's exceedingly well written, microscopic in detail, and very enjoyable. So when it's guys, order it, read it. It's a great book. You're gonna love it. Gaz, thanks again, mate, and thank you for joining us on the show. Always a pleasure. And we'll see you next week for more football stories on Football Geeks podcast. Until then, bye for now.